Good evening, everybody, or good morning, depending on where in the world you are. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us for today's discussion. Movements have been gaining momentum and frequency over the last few years. And there are so many of them, and sometimes it's hard to keep track, right? Between Black Lives Matter, between climate change, between Me Too. There's certainly been a lot of them. And this year in particular really does seem to feel like some of them have gotten to quite a sharp pain point, and perhaps due to the great unifying fire that is COVID-19. But ultimately, these movements are about the inherent tension between the world we want to have and the one that we currently live in, and the desire that people have to really move us as quickly as possible to that end state. And as customers change, so too must brands, right? And I don't think there's ever been a better time to really explore how brands impact and are impacted by social revolutions. Today, that's really what we are going to be discussing. I have an incredible panel of speakers to run through this interesting topic with us. There is an opportunity for everybody to post questions, some of them which I will field to the panel themselves. And there will also be a questionnaire or two that you can respond to that we will also use as part of the discussion. Before I introduce my illustrious panel of speakers, I'd like to thank our partners, Vodacom, Easy Ads, Everylytic, Proudly SA, The Media Shop, and Wanifra. Thank you so much for making this discussion possible. So, I'm going to start now with introducing our speakers. And the first I'd like to introduce is Daruda Lynnette. Daruda's creative contributions have generated over 14 billion global media impressions and sales to date for cultural leaders, including Lady Gaga, Kanye West, Miss Lauryn Hill, The Weeknd, and Justin Bieber. Daruda has worked as a manager, publisher, producer, A&R, and creative director for Grimes, DJ Snake, Skrillex, Blood Pop, and more. Daruda believes in a world where artists are seen, heard, and economically empowered in the music streaming era. He is currently the founder and CEO of CreateSafe, a tech platform for artists to build, run, optimize, and expand their business. He has also used Primal, which we will chat about shortly with Patrick, in his projects, and it says he likes to laugh a lot. So we're expecting to see a lot of laughter from you, Daruda. Our second guest is Joseph Pirillo. Joseph is a founder and CEO of social content company Props. Joe was the first chief marketing officer for the city of New York, which must be an incredibly challenging job, and I'm sure he's glad he's not doing that right now. He was also a marketing head at sports team, the New York Yankees. He has helped develop and launch a healthy food snack venture with Mars and Muhammad Ali. Joe has been a longtime advocate, user, and partner with Primal Branding. Hi, Joe. Our third panelist today is Michael Perman. Michael is an innovation futurist, and I cannot wait to ask him what that is. And he's also the CEO of Say What. Michael was a senior director, global marketing at Levi & Strauss Company, and senior director of global innovation at Gap. Today, as I mentioned, he's the innovation futurist and a CEO at his firm Say What, based in Portland, Oregon. And we were having a great discussion before about some of the challenges that are there. And Michael was a pioneering advocate for primal branding methodology, and today leads major corporations to perceive alternative realities and the courage to move towards them. Hello, Michael. And our final guest is Patrick. Patrick Hanlon is founder and CEO of Primal Branding. His Primal Branding book, my apologies, is required reading at YouTube. Hanlon works with billion-dollar brands and those who want to become billion-dollar brands, which is hopefully everybody on this call. Clients include Google, Microsoft, Levi's, PayPal, United Nations, VW, Upworthy, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Time Warner, Johnson & Johnson, and many more. Hello, Patrick, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Good to be here. Thanks everyone else for all the other members of the panel as well. Thanks for devoting your time to this.
Right, thank you. So my first question is actually going to go out to Michael. As Twitter becomes the main source, or should I rather say social media, becomes the main source of information for many people, whether they own it or not, the term social movement is indeed thrown about a lot, and it's in our title for today's talk. What are some of the things that you look for when deciding whether a social media has traction, is a long-term thing that is worth paying attention to and responding to, particularly given how quickly they seem to come in waves and dissipate as quickly as they appeared?
Thanks for the excellent question, and hello, everybody. I think people are seeking meaning right now. We've been living in an era for a number of years where it's hard to understand what truth means. So people are trying to organize and find a way to make sense of the world. So sense making is a really important part that leads to a narrative. And I think the movements that we're seeing have really core elements of the narrative. They follow a lot of the different elements of the primal code. So they have a creation story, an event took place. They have a creed. They have rituals that take place, and people gather around those kind of movements. And really, from a perspective of somebody who's been in the fashion business, it's a difference between a fad and a trend. A movement has legs. A movement has the ability to build upon itself and to have an ongoing story that is told, and it's trying to accomplish something important in the world. It is noticing a tectonic shift that's emerging, and it's providing the content and the activity to respond to that shift.
Mm. And I'm glad that you're using the primal code in your answer, because that does tee me up for a question for Patrick. I was going to ask him to please, for the benefit of our audience members who might not be familiar with it, do you mind sharing a little bit about what primal branding is and what the primal code is, in response to Michael's point?
Sure. Glad to. The primal code is really a part of primal branding. Primal code is the root code for building authentic brands. And it's a system of 7 data points. As Michael just outlined, there's a creation story, there's a creed, there are icons, there are rituals, there are special words, a lexicon, ice grande, skinny decaf latte. There are non-believers, people who don't want to, which we're very much involved in right now. People don't want to believe what you do. They, in a marketing sense, they don't like Coke, they like Pepsi, or they like Red Bull, or they like something else. And then finally, the leaders. And once you pull these 7 pieces together, you are basically building a belief system that attracts others who share your beliefs. And so we use that construct to both deconstruct brands and piece them back together again.
Mm. And Patrick, one could argue that in times of great upheaval, and Michael put it so well around this difficult narrative that's emerged. One could argue that the primal branding is more important than ever before. Would you agree with that?
Well, primal branding has always been important, and it's the reason that why we believe in people, places, and things. And things in this case are, hashtag Black Lives Matter, the COVID, and some people believe, some people don't believe, and so it's the way that you build. People didn't believe in COVID, for example, quickly enough in some cases. And so the pieces, it takes us, at least in the United States, we need to hear about something from 5 different places before, or at least 5 different times before we start to even perceive it, before we can even say, yeah, I think I've heard of that. And so that alone didn't build quickly enough for some people. And in addition to that, you need all 7 pieces of what we call the primal code in order for it to really take shape and make sense to people. And that, in the case of COVID, didn't happen enough either. And of course, there are all these varying opinions that are in conflict with World Health Organization. And speaking about COVID anyway, are in conflict with World Health Organization and what are the best practices of some other countries and healthcare professionals around the world. So there's a lot of confusion, and when you're marketing a product, the confused do not buy. And when you're trying to relay important information, life-saving information, in this case, out there, it's critical.
Mm, mm. I think that's a good point, because I think in the context of this confusion, and I think, you know, confusion breeds fear for many people, and very little good decision making happens when people are operating from a place of fear. So I'd like to ask Joe a question. In this kind of environment, what do you think is the role that brands should be looking to play?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, there is this drive towards authenticity. I think that is very important, that marketers have sought to embrace. Yet they're still trying to implement their strategies and their tactics through the lens of and the construct of advertising. The agency system, the media system, the creative system, the staffs, all of the people in that construct are still geared and trained to make ads. And ads are inherently not authentic. They are made up. They're designed to be manipulative. You know, and at their best, maybe they'll inspire or maybe they'll make us laugh. And at their worst, you know, they talk down to people.
Yeah.
If you really look at an ad and really try and deconstruct it without trying to be a consumer, you know, it is a disrespectful communication to a person, because it does not care about what that person is seeking. It only cares about itself. So when you're briefing if you're in an advertising agency or creative agency, like we've all been there, you know, and you get the brand brief is identifying the audience by whatever it can sort of put its fingers on. And in the old world, that was age and demo and gender and all that sort of stuff. But the majority of the brief is, here's what I want to say as the marketer. I want to say this, and I want people to think about this, right? So it was very one-sided. And today, that's not the case. So the very question of advertising, I think, is in question today, which is a good thing. As a lifelong marketer, I think that's a good thing. It's scary for some people because they've made their lives on this, and they've, you know, and that's all they know. And so they're scared, and they should be, I think, but that's okay too, because, you know, this is a time of creative destruction. I think someone wrote, Tom Friedman said, there's going to be a lot of creative destruction happening. That's really good. So the brands who are embracing authenticity today, there are, I think, two kinds. The exceptional brands are willing to go out on a limb and take a political or cultural stance. Okay, and those are exceptional brands. You know, this is Nike, right? Nike's an exceptional brand. And there are other brands who aren't really that exceptional, and they're trying to just play the fence and be a politician and like ride the wave and get out of this and don't get hurt. And then there are brands who are embracing content, and they've always embraced content. And when I say content, I don't mean branded content. Okay, that's advertising disguised as content. I don't mean BMW films, right? Really good innovation thing, but that's still a film with BMWs in it. In a decent film, not even a great film. When I mean content, I mean the way that brands like Patagonia have been publishing content and Red Bull has been making content, right? These are real stories. Patagonia publishes real stories about, you know, saving the waterways. And there's no mention of Patagonia in the content. There's no mention of Red Bull in the content, although they do a good job of putting their logo in places. It's just about, for Red Bull, it's about taking risks, right? For Patagonia, it's about protecting the environment. Those brands are really authentic because they're not selling Patagonia. They're selling this greater ideal. The ideal for Red Bull is take risks. The ideal for Patagonia is take care of Mother Nature. That's a great ideal. So they're already being authentic because they're not worried about selling.
Mm.
And they can take those risks because it's true to who they are. They can say, guys, you should wear a mask. It's not that complicated.
Mm. Mm. That's an interesting and in some ways provocative point of view, because I think one of the challenges is that it's difficult to get away as a brand from the idea that you have to sell stuff to remain sustainable, right? Otherwise, you cease to exist. And it sounds a little bit, and again, this is me trying to be provocative, like you're suggesting that authenticity can only be for those who have some sort of do-goodery at heart.
That's a good question. I mean, it's a good point. I don't think it's do-goodery, although that is a great word.
Thank you.
I love that phrase. I do think to be authentic means to be your true self, right? So you have to know who you are in order to be true to yourself. So, as a person, think about what you have to be authentic as a person. Essentially, not just go through life being who you are without apologizing for it. So as a brand, all you really have to do is say, this is who we are. And there are brands who I think come at it from the conservative side in the United States, who say, hey guys, we're closed on Sunday. This is part of who we are. We go to church on Sunday. And so we don't apologize for it. You can make fun of us, but that's who we are. And there are other brands who say, they come at it from the left, and they say, this is who we are, and all people should have a voice. And as long as they're true to who they are, it's fine. When brands don't make a declaration for who they are and what they stand for, then they're relegated to advertising.
I would add that
relegated to that space of sales and price and they're to use a word, they're screwed.
I would add that that's why the creation story is so important, because the principles come from the creation story, and really good brands look at what that story means, and they continue to lean into that story and keep culturally current with new activities and new relevance and new dimensions of the story, so that they're naturally authentic. They don't have to make it up. It happens and they're just telling it.
I do want to come back to your point about cultural relevance. But before I do, Patrick, was there something you were trying to say there before I move to Daruda?
Well, I think that authentic brands are always authentic brands, and that they've always been authentic brands. You can't suddenly pivot. And authentic purpose-driven brands have always been authentic purpose-driven brands. It's in their bones. You can't all of a sudden say, okay, we're going to pivot. You guys were right all along. We're going to pivot. We're going to be good now. They've been authentic all along. Patagonia, it started out by making spikes that you drove into the side of a mountain, and that spike had to work because you're hanging from a rope, right? And so that authenticity was derived from just making good quality products, and that's great. But that's the way they started, and that's the way they've been, and that has evolved into, let's preserve Mother Earth. And but it basically came out of their, as Michael was saying, out of their creation story and where they came from. And Levi is the same thing. They put rivets in their jeans because they wanted the jeans to be durable and hang on. And they're sewn with 2 pieces of thread, double stitched down the sides, because they wanted them to last a long time. And the creation story of Levi's jeans is they had, one of them anyway, is they used, their advertising used to show 2 horses trying to pull the jeans apart, and they didn't come apart. So anyway.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad that we're talking about authenticity, because that gives me some a great segue to a question for Daruda. I think working with people brands, which is arguably what you do a lot more of, and particularly during COVID, there's been a lot of challenge around celebrities, musicians, etc., showing up as authentic and credible. What do you think is the role that people brands should be looking to play in a time like this?
Um, I think that most artists right now are attempting to use their natural creative talents to provide some type of healing for the communities that they've either built or been a part of building. And then, I think there are also some artists who are confused about what they need to be doing. Being like making art is a very expressive thing to do. It's an expressive way to live your life. So when that's how these different channels, like using social media or making a music video or making a song, those are the different channels that artists typically have to express themselves and do their art form. So some artists are doing it really well, and it's always been a part of their music or their art form. Some artists are attempting to figure out how to use these new channels, like being like, okay, how do I use TikTok now so that I can like create a voice there where like people are at, so I can be provide my art. Especially if they have if it resonates with the current climate of what's going on, like someone like Killer Mike and Run the Jewels. They just put out an album. That album, they were recording it before a lot of what is going on today, but it's timely information. So then how do those artists or how does an artist like Run the Jewels go out and create audience for this new music, which is healing in nature? Like if you listen to it, you can learn, you can approach what they're saying from an empathetic point of view. There's so much goodness in what a Run the Jewels has done. And so they're figuring out new ways to like get that message, into the world, where some artists are just now making, the art that potentially people are going to go on to appreciate. So it's a challenging, like I'm seeing it as a challenging time for a lot of artists, but also you're seeing a lot of really interesting, beautiful art being made that is either healing or empowering to the people who are like on the front lines.
And that's a beautiful answer, because again, using your craft to do what you do is about authenticity, right? So it's not again about trying to adopt something new and become, I don't know, a politician or whatever the case may be. It's about sticking to what you do and using that to heal. And I think one of the things that artists do very well is about remaining kind of culturally relevant, right? And you've obviously done a lot in this space. How do you go about navigating the changing shifts that happen in terms of what's happening culturally, and knowing what are the things that you should be responding to and leveraging versus those that you should kind of ignore and I think, as Michael called it, fads?
I think weirdly enough, or not weirdly enough, it comes from a place, I think, of like mindfulness right now. I think it's a very interesting time that like in order to like be able to like swat out the things that like you don't need to be paying attention to, you need to have a practice built around that. Like that's what mastering your craft essentially is. Like artists who have been able to like successfully do that, like let's say like a Kendrick Lamar, where he is able to like not be, too like captivated by what's going on a daily basis, but has a team around him to help him synthesize and create beautiful stories that essentially helped to change the world in a timely way. Like a lot of his music, like that is out there right now. Like he has a song called "It's All Right." I had a lot of that messaging you see today already, in these older music videos or actually in the song. So it's a moment where one, the people catch up to what you're doing, and that innovation and their ability to see that you're like an actual craftsperson. And I think that resonates in obviously like how you present your brand to the world. I think like to Patrick's point about primal branding, I think there are moments where you can see elements of like TD and him and Kendrick Lamar and the people around him having created these like, iconic moments in each of these almost like brands that he's built over time. To Pimp a Butterfly or latest Damn. There's the icons of like the red letter, and big, Times New Roman lettering. There's like the way in which each track name was capitalized with periods. There was a certain like font style, and then there's different probably origin stories in each song. So it's like they've done a good job of doing that. And today, in this time, it's like it's easier to say like, either I love these things that I've already built, let me hold on to them, let me continue to double down and like showcase them to the world, especially these messages. Or for some artists, being authentic is actually being like, well, I made a mistake, this is wrong, and I'm going to own up to it. Or like, I said this before, I'm not, but I'm no longer interested in this. I want to pivot because this is a more improved way to do something. And I think you're seeing artists authentically do that as well. Like someone like Grimes, who I work with, like we double down on just like the using technology to spread the art in interesting ways, like using it as an actual art form, doubling down on that as a part of like the authenticity of her brand.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, because again, you go back to the idea of authenticity, and Patrick mentioned something earlier that it's very difficult to pull apart authenticity and purpose-driven in some ways. Before we delve into that, I think it's important that we have a shared understanding of what that means. So, Pat, what do you mean when you say a brand is purpose-driven?
Me?
Yes, Patrick, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I think that they have a purpose, and they have meaning, and they have a destiny or a sightline, a horizon sightline that they're moving toward, and that's why they exist. And they all believe that, and they hire people to help them do that, and people want to be hired because they want to help them do that. And they have a purpose out there. They're not just producing product and putting it on the racks. They have a larger mission that they're pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
Some examples of that would be Apple, obviously, whether they wanted to put a ding in the universe, whether Steve Jobs wanted to put a ding in the universe, or if they were making computers for the rest of us, which is the way they would first attracted us to them, and pre-iPhone. And then there are other people, Tesla, for example, who is trying to create a car, an alternative kind of car that doesn't use gasoline, to hopefully preserve the world. And there are a lot of others out there as well. There's a new company called, I think it's called Pangea, which is a clothing company, sort of like Uniqlo, but whereas Uniqlo tends to be sort of fast fashion in some ways, Pangea is a materials company trying to design a better world, quote unquote.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned different kinds of brands, like fashion brands? Because one of the questions we've got here, which is for Michael specifically from the audience, is really about trying to understand the impact on premium lifestyle brands, arguably fashion is one of them, that will happen over the next 2 years, given where we are.
So let me understand the question. The question is the impact on premium brands of our current cultural zeitgeist?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And in the context of the pandemic as well, of COVID-19, yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's two elements of that question. One is just pure economics. But the economics also point to the cultural divide. You know, we over time around the world, and especially true in the United States, have an increasing cultural and economic division between the high end and the low end. You know, the average wage of a person, hourly wage of a person is, you know, far below what it was even in the 1980s. So I think there is the economic impact of the situations that are happening now, and they're going to affect the performance of premium brands. But I think that's also a redefinition of what premium means. Premium is not necessarily luxury. And in fact, when we were at Levi's, we did a lot of research on this, and I think it's true today. A premium might mean that you do have more meaning built into your brand. Premium might mean that you paid attention to the sustainability aspects. Premium might mean that you're tuned into fair wages and fair trade. So premium isn't always about glitz and luxury and Gucci and LVMH. It is about premium means substance. Can you provide value, meaning, authenticity in your brand? Are you doing something that's good for the world? People they are now, and they're going to continue to value that sense of premium versus just pure luxury.
That's a wonderful quote. Premium is about substance, not just about luxury. I really like that. And actually, I'd like to ask Joe the same question around, particularly because you've worked on so many different kinds of brands, right? So City of New York and the Yankees, if you were still in those boardrooms, what would you be advising around how they navigate this current zeitgeist?
Well, those aren't two good choices.
That's why I chose them.
And the City of New York. I mean, let's just start with the City of New York. And I created a new revenue stream using the city's vast marketing assets that sort of went unleveraged, right? This is out of home. This is intellectual property. These are logos. This is all the things that you can imagine existed in New York City, but were never centralized and organized, and then generate a revenue from those, just in the same way a sports league would, right? Through media sponsorship, licensing, events, and then channel that money into tourism, right? And that was part of the reason why New York City's tourism really went up high. Part of the reason, not the whole thing. So today, if I were in New York City, there are thousands and thousands of attractions. There's Broadway, there's museum and cultural institutions that make New York City so rich. Those institutions, of which what I'm on the board of, are suffering because they rely so much on international travel and travel from the rest of the country to really drive their revenue. So all those institutions are driving towards reawakening their brand among New Yorkers, right? So as a New Yorker, if anyone's ever known a New Yorker, there's a certain pride in not having ever been to the Empire State Building, right? It's sort of ridiculous. As a tourism marketer, I hated it, right? But there is like, oh, I've never been there and blah, 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 or you're never caught dead in Times Square, right? So as a tourism marketer who now needs to reach New Yorkers, my advice to them, which I've given, is we've got to change this longstanding sort of point of pride. which is now you need to go to the Empire State Building. You need to take a circle line around Manhattan. You need to go to the Statue of Liberty because we have to survive. So you have to do this. In terms of the sports franchises like the New York Yankees, they're probably in a better situation because although ticket revenue and hot dogs and T-shirts and all that is very, very important, of course, they can still generate revenue from media. And although it's going to be weird to see a baseball game with no fans, you know, they still have that revenue source. And you could argue that there's an enormous amount of pent up demand to watch baseball or cricket or football or whatever your sport is. So if I had to choose, you know, what's the easier job is probably this, you know, the CEO of a sports franchise versus the CMO of the city of New York right now.
Okay, and I think that's really practical, great advice for people who may be working on brands of that nature. And I would like to actually ask this next question, which is from Marie. I hope I'm saying your name properly. And it's a question for Pat. How do you suggest a team of young millennials shift the minds of an older executive board from being 100% focused on sales to also focusing on the kind of marketing that builds relationships before we worry about, or builds loyalty, before selling?
Yeah, well, it's no secret that having a brand is worth many times having just a company with assets. And so it's not money wasted to spend money promoting a brand because you'll sell for 5x or 10x, you know, times. And so that's one reason. The other reason is that it's much cheaper to have, much less expensive in the long run to have a brand, because when you have a brand, you not only grow, but your passionate zealots do all of your marketing for you. In other words, they talk about you, they love you, and they're so committed and so passionate about you. This is the new strategy, or the new marketing objective, is to create a community around your enterprise that becomes so passionate about your success that they create it themselves, right? They're talking to other people, they're telling their friends tell other friends. And so Google talks about the lifetime value of a customer, which is a little bit short-sighted for Google, because it's not just the lifetime value of one customer, but it's the lifetime value of that customer plus all the other people that happy customer is going to tell, and that those people are going to tell in turn. And so it just becomes exponential. And so social media and so forth, social and digital media and traditional media, you bring those together, you figure out what your creation story, create icons, rituals, special language, and leaders and all that non-believers are, and you sprinkle that across social and digital media in content and traditional media, and so that you surround your prospects, your customers, both existing ones, because they need to hear from you too, and you need to stay relevant and resonant with them, but also your prospects, your sales prospects that are out there. And but the biggest thing is, because what Joe was pointing to earlier was that advertising, traditional advertising these days, most people don't believe. 80-90% just flat out don't believe it. That same percentage, I don't know if it's the same people or different people, but they think it's a lie. You know, in other words, it's suspect. Whatever your messaging is from the corporation, the top-down messaging is suspect. And so you need today that other content that's out there that's either talking about you directly or talking about you embracing your customer through affinity. In other words, you're communicating your message or similar messages similar to yours through the other things that your customers like, because they're not just drinking Red Bull, they're engaging in sports, and they're driving cars. And, you know, we belong to a lot of micro communities, you know, whether we're playing sports, as Joe was just pointing out, or we're wearing blue jeans, or we're listening to music, or we're drinking a liquid of some kind. Those are all the micro communities, and with staunch advocates in each one, driving
So,
part, right?
yeah, thank you. And actually, that makes me want to ask Daruda a question, because I think both Joe and Pat have spoken about content and the importance of kind of, credible, meaningful content. But obviously, it's not useful if nobody watches it, right? So, what are some of the hallmarks of making really great content? I think you're on mute.
I think it starts with production, and essentially having a great production team, or even a production process. So like, notice how I'm like, there is the individual production process, and then there's obviously like the process with the team, but both of them are like equally important. I have worked primarily with producer artists throughout my career, and with all of them, and with what we do as a company, Create Safe, is we help build production processes. So really understanding how to use things like Primal Branding, or even things like OKRs, like these different frameworks that exist for like organizing creative thoughts. Like a lot of times people, I don't, see them putting it that way. Like project management is normally like a dirty word. And it really is like a tool to, if you can frame it in the right way, like using things like Airtable or something like that, you can give a creative process, you can give a stale process a creative spin. And that's the core of production, right? Like you need to be able to like take these, amazing, like these ideas that are just coming, like, let's say, we were the seven of us, well, I guess it's like more so five of us on, but the five of us, if we were in a writing room right now, we were like, making a television show or making a record together, there'd be all these ideas bouncing around, and whose job is it to put those ideas into a codified way? Whose job is it to, it rearrange them so that it like speaks, it sounds the best. That's all production. Whether it's like, when you're producing a song, you're sitting there and you're attempting to take a variety of different sounds and line them up in a way that makes sense, that like becomes like this algorithm, which is essentially a song. And that, gives somebody an emotion, like, and that production process of what that, figuring out how that sound has to have a different, bass or, treble, is literally like, oh, I understand how to use this tool. I have these processes of how to like line these things up on this grid and change the sonic in this way. So like going back to the original, question of like, the full package of great content, whether it's a song or a video, those base production processes that you can employ, which is like, in a simple way, like having a daily routine, in the way in which you go about making that song or making songs, becomes a part of your production process, which, then becomes a part of you mastering your craft on a daily basis, which turns into you making, great content, I think. And like, you see it in a lot of the content that has lasted for many years. Some of it controversial. But there comes a point in time when you can like, that those great brands have stood this test of time, like sticking to that, like kind of like primal code, and honing that and turning that into like one of your systems, that like, helps you, create iconic songs or brands that last the test of time. And that's what content is at the end. Like, content is this weird catch-all phrase now. It just means art.
Yeah.
how people make art.
Yeah, yeah, that's a beautiful quote I'm taking with me. Content just means art. And what I like what you're talking about in terms of almost brilliant basics, right? So making sure you've got an incredibly talented team working on it, and with really diverse skills, and ideally kind of diverse experiences. And that's definitely been one of the emergent trends in the last kind of decade or so. I think in terms of people really starting to appreciate the benefit of a diverse team, and I don't just mean in terms of race. I mean in terms of skills, experience, background, etc. So it helps me lead to a question for Michael, which is also from the audience. And the question is, as an innovation futurist, what are some of the trends that you are seeing emerging from the current cultural zeitgeist?
Yeah, excellent question. I think one of the major trends, I think there's two. One I'll call novel forms of empathy, and the other is around sense making. So the proliferation of social media in particular that has enabled anything to be said about anybody without regard to any sense of truth, has led people to a great state of confusion. We used to have leaders of all sorts that we could turn to for what we defined as truth. And that's become quite diluted thanks to brands like Facebook, who really don't care about truth at all. That they've designed a system where your free subscription is arbitrated by revenue from advertisers. So I think one of the major trends is around sense making. It could be in terms of agencies and or brands as media companies. It could be deploying artificial intelligence and blockchain in order to define what truth is, to be able to understand accuracy and truth so that people have some sense of what to believe in the world. So I think media brands are going to need to do that moving forward, and we're going to see more and more of it. The second one is what I would call novel forms of empathy. So because of the COVID situation where we have less human contact, we have this kind of global deficit of oxytocin. We're not hugging as much. We're not high-fiving. We're not shaking hands. We're not dancing. We're not singing. All those things that produce oxytocin in your body is what generally leads to empathy. So now we need new forms, right? It's how you wink to somebody underneath the mask, how you communicate, how you convey a sense of consciousness and mindfulness in this format that we're in now, in a Zoom format. How do you make that human connection? I think we're going to see new ways for humans around the planet to develop these forms of empathy. And I think, media companies and brands have a role to play in that regard, because they have to tell the right stories, exhibit the right rituals, say the right words, have maybe the physical manifestations of how you use your hands or whatever to transcend the limitations of a virtual situation, and raise these novel forms of empathy.
I really like those two trends because they actually speak to something Joe was talking about earlier on, and actually a trend that came out, I think it was at Cannes last year, which really spoke about the need for brands to shift from storytelling to brand doing. So what are the things that your brand is actively doing to make a meaningful difference in people's lives? And I think those are two great examples of things that brands could look at. And this idea of shifting from storytelling to doing then potentially poses a challenge to traditional big advertising agencies. And there's a question here from someone called Mike to Joe, and I think it's based on what you said earlier. So given this discussion, is there still a role for traditional big advertising agencies in the face of these kinds of emerging trends?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just want to respond to Michael's point, the novel forms of empathy, which I think is great. I think people who are Italian are going to have an advantage in this new world because we're so used to using our hands to communicate. So you'll all have to catch up. You'll all have to catch up.
You'll have to give lessons.
The food. Don't forget the food.
To answer the serious question of is big agencies, I think was the question.
Yes.
I think they're screwed.
That's not the answer they're looking for, Joe. They're looking for empathy here.
Well, let me finish. In their current state,
Yeah.
if they stay the way that they're structured, the way that which is, looking back, if they're structured in not an agile form, right? So if you thought about if you were going to start an advertising agency today, and let's take the word advertising out and just call it agency, right? A person in the middle to get things done, to think things through, or with expertise in finding insights, right? That's the best agencies are finding insights into either people, the competition, right, or your product. And then, to use a harsh term, they're exploiting those insights, right, to drive growth, to drive sales. So if you were going to set up an agency today, you would essentially set up your agency to serve direct-to-consumer brands. And direct-to-consumer brands are fueling their growth based on the world being open to exploring new brands. Everyone is essentially, there be no direct-to-consumer brands, there be no Casper, right, which is a mattress brand, there'd be no Lunia, there'd be no, all of these new brands are popping up, not because they're great marketers on television, because they've reinvented how to buy, right? So Dollar Shave Club, right, great example of a brand. They reinvented how to buy. The razor's not as good. You come up with all these different things. These are all direct-to-consumer brands. And if you want to survive as an agency today, you've got to set yourself up to serve direct-to-consumer brands. If you don't, if you think in terms of GRPs, right, and demographics and impressions and and click-through rates, and all of those baloney media metrics, and I'm sorry if I'm offending sponsors right now, but if you embrace all of those metrics rather than the real metrics that matter, and the only metrics that matter if you're an agency is, did you drive growth or not? Attribution is becoming easier and easier to figure out, not without its challenges, right? Not without its challenges, of course. But you've got to leave the world of the old school. These are metrics that we were using in 1978. Not me. I wasn't doing it. But we're being used in 1978, and we've got to graduate from that. You have to. The opportunities are, media agencies can get into the creative game. That's exciting. That is really exciting, and it's something that powers our company. Media companies can see the opportunity because we are creating content without a staff. Real content, not influencer stuff. We're creating content without a staff, and it's real and it's authentic, and our brands are publishing. Media companies see that opportunity and they're like, wow, I can get into the creative game. Creative companies, I would say, are having a harder time. Not everybody is a Primal Branding, right? Patrick's really pioneered this amazing strategy that is power. If you were going to start a religion today, I say read Primal Branding and apply it to its T, because that is at its core. If you look at all the great religions, look at all the great rock bands, look at all the great sports brands, they all have that primal code underneath them, and that was the genius behind Primal Branding. Now, lots of agencies don't have a Patrick Hanlon. They don't have that sort of root code, and they are going to have to survive on their wits. And that's going to be different. It's going to be hard because you can't really, you can't exercise any point of differentiation for every single client every single time and come up with a grand slam home run for every single client all the time. It won't work. You've got to come up with something different if you're a creative agency. So I would not want to be a creative agency today. And I say that having founded one and started one and thankfully got, sold it. I would not want to be a creative agency today. I hope that helps.
Sure, it does, but we'd have to ask poor Mike, who might be weeping at the moment based on your answer. But I do think it's a very robust and helpful answer. Thank you. So given that, it's time for us to wrap up, and I would like each of the panelists to answer a question for me in closing. And Patrick, I think I'll start with you. The topic for today was really about brand evolution in social revolution. And what are the key opportunities that you see for brands during this real seismic shift in society?
Yeah, well, people are looking for change, and if you are ever thinking about changing, now is the time to do it. You have permission to do so from consumers, and so seize that. I would also say that media companies today, I'm just adding on to what Joe was saying, and that is that media companies, whereas traditional advertising agencies are disadvantaged in this current climate, media companies really hold the key to the kingdom, because people need social, digital, and traditional media in order to survive. So either.
Thank you. Fantastic answer. Daruda, answer to the same question?
Well, I want to just talk about the last statement about media companies and creative companies.
Sure.
Because I feel like they're one and the same, and it's just like, while they might have like some different functions internally, like anyone that is making art or content is essentially a media or creative company at this point in time. And it just relies on having great art. It relies on having a great brand. It relies on being able to get your content and art or message out as quickly and sustainably as possible in a way that like is lasting. Essentially, that requires a great team. That requires different different backgrounds in terms of experiences, whether it's work or how someone grew up, and really understanding how to harness technology. Currently, it's like, I think the future of not even the future, where we're at today is virtual, and virtual not in the sense of how people have always talked about it, like we're in virtual reality or things like that, but more like we're in a metaverse or a multiverse, like not only in our phones and computers, but like even how we interact with one another on a daily basis. We're it's almost like what I keep saying internally to some my staff, like we're playing 4D chess. And so like the concept of like a creative or media or what we have to do, it's like you have to double down on like what your core talents are, like what got you to wherever you're at in terms of a business or a solo creator, and then figure out how to innovatively use the tools that are available to you. Like OpenAI just dropped this thing called GPT-3, and it is a open source artificial intelligence system that allows you to do things like be like, hey, I want to build an app and I want it to do this, and it creates you the JavaScript code. Like these are like the technology is here right now, and it's happening in a major way. And it's also easier to understand than it's ever been in terms of like like what programming and development is. So, if you want to be a company, today, or if you want to be a brand today, use technology, in a way that is authentic to how you are able to engage with it, but use it.
Thank you. I know that we've on the hour, but I really do want to hear what both Joe and Michael have to say. So Joe, can you answer the same question first? Then we'll go to Michael around the opportunity for brands.
Quickly repeat that question.
Sure. So what do you think is the opportunity for brands in this massive time of social change?
Great. Well, number one is, I think everyone sort of touched on this. We all have access to all of the people. Right? They're like Facebook or not, but look at Google, look at Twitter, look at all of the other platforms. We all have the same access to all of the people, where in the past, you had to go to ESPN for the guys and Good Housekeeping for the moms, right? All that's all gone.
Yeah.
Now we all have access to them. What we need are great creators and good content and the courage to publish it and drive people there. When brands embrace those three things, they will succeed and they will transform themselves.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Michael, your answer?
So I think the opportunity is to embrace a new form of singularity. And this new form of singularity is the intersection of understanding trends, but also creating the future, a combination of creating the future and seeing the future. Innovation is the ability to perceive alternative realities and the courage to move towards those visions. And it's not alternative realities in terms of a psychedelic trip, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's the ability to see and manifest and create what is coming next instead of waiting for an answer, waiting for a JavaScript to fall in my lap. I'm not sure what I would do with that if it happened. I would, but it's not about waiting and asking about the trends. It's about doing the work to create what's next, not for waiting that to happen. And I think the agencies and the brands that devote the energy, apply the primal code to making that happen, are the ones that are going to win in the future.
Sure. That's really great advice from each of the panelists, right? Seize the moment, let's do it, take action, make art. Some really, really great advice from the four panelists. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to the four of you for making the time to talk to us. Really do appreciate it. And I'm sure we've learned, everybody, including me, has learned a lot from the discussion. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our partners again. So Vodacom, Easy Ads, Everlytic, Proudly SA, The Media Shop, and Wanifra. Thank you very much for making this possible, and wishing everybody all the best. And thank you, of course, to the people who've joined the call. I hope you found it as insightful as I did. Thank you.
Share one last thing. I think we talked about this before, but if, I know this is for like South Africa as well, specifically, like as a brand or agency, like Amapiano is like the best music in the world right now. So if you're a brand and you're an agency, please support this new form, it's not new, it's a couple of years old, but it's like the most fire music coming out anywhere. And Cabza the Small, he's like the biggest DJ producer making it. He's incredible. Like, that's a place to double down and support, emerging genres like that. That's going to do great for your ads and your brands and all that. Like, it's fire.
Amapiano.
Yeah.
Amapiano.
I can't tell the audience the shock I heard having 4 people from the US tell me about Amapiano, but I think you're absolutely right. It's definitely making waves, and we don't do that enough. We don't use enough of the great talent that we have locally, and it goes to what Joe was saying, right? When you're talking about New York City and the job they need to do, I don't think that's different to any country at the moment, and that's something that
great ideas win.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Well, thank you guys. I'm going to close with that.
Namaste.